I don't think any of us are surprised by this Royal College of Nursing report, and yet it's still pretty hard to hear.
Yeah, it is. It's very difficult. But Jonathan will have views on this, but we had a hugely intense period under COVID. The NHS was brilliant, but it was under massive pressure. We had put money into it as a country. But the problem is that the demands that we have had to endure, particularly with COVID, have meant that resources are stretched, and the consequence of that is what was outlined in the report.
Well, as you know, for many years I was Labour's Shadow Health Secretary, and for 14 years under the previous government, the NHS was underfunded. It didn't get the traditional uplifts in expenditure that it frankly got
at the beginning of the period.
Well, frankly,
but at the end,
well, no, usually the sort of rule of thumb for NHS expenditure should be a 4% increase year by year. That's what it got throughout its 70-odd, well, nearly 80-year history now. It didn't really get that throughout the Conservative years. So the NHS has been trying to deliver care with its hands tied behind its back, if you like. And this is in a context now where, as a society, we are generally living longer, which is a good thing, obviously, but as we live longer, we tend to have more complex conditions. And one of the big issues that is impacting the NHS is the failure to provide proper, decent care for people, what we call social care, so that essentially you are now queuing to get in the front door of a hospital and you're queuing to get out of the back door because there's no social care support to look after you in the community.
But the context
your heart bleeds for but your heart bleeds for the patients in that situation, of course, first and foremost. But you also think of the staff, don't you?
Sure.
Because what this report highlights is that corridor care, which in essence is an awful term, is something that brilliant staff can deal with in an emergency when there's been a terrible accident or a surge of situations. But because that's sort of coping has become the norm, and then it goes, OK, we've coped, it's now beyond that triple-fold, so that they're in a situation where they can't even look after the people in the corridor anymore.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? It's like the failing is standardised.
So I think what Jonathan says about funding is a part of the story. But actually, one of the things we found in government was we were putting more money, but all that it multiplied were the managers. So if you have more managers, you're not necessarily going to deal with this frontline issue with and the appallingly termed corridor
So what?
care.
That was the hospital's fault then?
No, it's not the hospital's fault. There's
so
whose
fault was it for employing managers?
Well, look, the simple truth is we don't have enough nurses in the National Health Service. I'm sure the RCN will have the figures in their report, but it's usually around sort of a shortage of about 40,000 nurses. That's partly because some of the training places and the support that graduates or young people would get to go into train to be a nurse was cut back in the George Osborne years. But towards the end of the Tory government, and it's been picked up by this Labour government, there are now plans to expand nursing training. We desperately do need more nurses in the NHS.
We've got to talk about the bureaucracy of it as well. You can't simply just say...
But in 14 years, didn't you try to tackle that bureaucracy?
But we did, but we didn't.
So why is that bureaucracy there?
Because that's a very good question, and we need to address it.
Well, Kwasi, though, one of your health secretaries, he's a sort of blast from the past now, a guy called Andrew Lansley.
Oh, yes, I remember.
He was supposed to get rid of all this bureaucracy, and he introduced this really complicated NHS reorganisation, which made it more bureaucratic and wasteful.
It was a while ago.
About the NHS, that in the case of doctors, we haven't trained enough.
Yeah.
But in the case of nurses, there are lots of nurses who then end up leaving the profession in their 30s, 40s and 50s because they don't want to carry on working there.
Right.
And
they don't want to
is that about pay, or is it about the kind of flexibility of working in the NHS, or is it, as this report says, if you're a trained nurse and you're dealing with people in corridors, it's just not a job you want to do. You hear people saying in the report, that is not nursing.
Yeah, we don't have enough nurses and midwives. They are certainly under the most intense, extraordinary
pressure is a key issue.
And everybody who's ever experienced NHS knows how brilliant nurses and midwives are.
But there are loads of trained nurses who aren't nursing, right?
That's right.
Is
absolutely.
Is that pay, or is that a combination of pay and thinking, I don't want to go in every day?
I think it's a combination of
factors.
factors.
Feel that patients are unsafe and I can't
think it's a
deliver.
combination of factors. A lot of them, and I go back to the bureaucracy, a lot of them were put off by that. Lots of people are hugely under pressure.
Yeah.
And it's a stressful job. And of course, there's the pay and conditions aspect as well. So a combination of factors means that people leave the profession perhaps before, they need to.
I guess the question, Jonathan, is Wes Streeting says he's ashamed, the Health Secretary, and he can be ashamed at the moment.
Yeah.
Because he could also say, as the Daily Mirror says, 14 years of underfunding.
Yeah.
How long can Labour say it's shameful and blame the past? At what point does it become... Is it already today? Is it Labour's problem? At what point does Labour own outcomes in the National Health Service?
I mean, it's certainly the government's problem, but the NHS, it's like a supertanker. It's going to take time to turn around this big, expensive part of our public services, right? It just says it's going to take a few years, but it's absolutely got to be one of the top priorities for this Labour government.
A few years,
What's the critical thing when you were, in the position of being shadow and working in that area that you think would make the change?
The investment, and this Labour government has put in considerable investment. Actually, I know the Kwasi was probably got lots of
criticism. It can't just be a function of money.
Let me finish.
I think pretty much all the investment this year is going in pay for existing staff.
I'm
not saying that's the wrong thing.
You have to get the staff.
But that's the truth.
Yeah.
Well, staff.
There aren't more nurses than doctors. It's nurses and doctors getting a pay rise, which is a good thing, but that doesn't deal with queues and corridor wait.
Well, part of the reason why so many staff were leaving the NHS is because they didn't feel they had fair pay deals. They've now got a fair pay deal.
So you might get
investment is going into the NHS, but you've also got to look at things like technology. So one of the things that Keir Starmer was talking about back on Monday, it seems a long time ago now, actually, but on Monday he was talking about the potential of technology, of AI. AI can actually now diagnose disease. AI is actually, some AI is more effective than X-rays at identifying bone fractures. So you've got to put a lot of investment in technology. That will improve the productivity that you're talking about.
But it'll take years. I mean, it won't happen overnight.
I'm not totally sure. If I was a nurse in a corridor with patients waiting for 8 hours, and I heard Keir Starmer saying AI is the solution, I might think to myself, hang on a sec, is he living in the real world?
But the thing about the corridors, right, that is about... The reason those patients are in corridors is because there's no beds for them to go into. The reason there's no beds for them to go into is because it's about the flow of a patient through the hospital. Because it comes back to this point about community social care. You literally cannot discharge patients at the other end to get them out to social care.
Wes Streeting has announced a review of social care.
Yes.
It's not going to report for 3 or 4 years.
I would urge the government to get on with a social care.
Why are they taking so long? Is it? I mean, it looks like they're kicking it in the long grass.
Well, it's because of two reasons. Everybody knows that social care is expensive to deliver, and usually the politicians completely fall out on the solution on social care.
And we had, you remember the 2017 election?
I do.
And that was all about
I remember the 2019 tax rise, which then got reversed.
Yes, but the dementia tax that you labelled the dementia tax was all about the social care issue. So it's a very difficult and sensitive political issue. That's maybe the reason why they want to extend, I'm afraid, the period of the inquiry.
Let me take you to back to Keir Starmer on Monday, because he was making a speech about AI. It got totally overshadowed by speculation about whether or not he was going to keep Rachel Reeves in her job. And Rachel Reeves has been under a lot of pressure in the last few days on the economy, rising interest rates. Interesting question, because there's a lot of speculation about this in the newspapers. I would say, looking back over the last 50 years, any time any Prime Minister has ever thought, I'm going to solve the problem of my Chancellor in crisis by sacking my Chancellor...
I've lived that.
It never worked out very well. And I was going to say, as you say, you are the lived experience.
So I looked
How long
at that.
did Liz Truss stay as Prime Minister after she sacked...
11 days. But she announced her resignation 6 days.
Right.
So I was sacked on the Friday, the 14th of October, etched in my memory. And then on the 20th of October, on Thursday, she came out in Downing Street and announced her resignation. And then 5 days later, Rishi Sunak was in number 11.
I mean, you could say the same about Margaret Thatcher and Nigel Lawson, John Major and Norman Lamont. Most Prime Ministers stick with their Chancellors because they know if they play the Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng... By the way, I've not yet received a letter from you asking me not to refer to...
No, cease and desist.
Cease and desist. This is that Liz Truss sent a letter to Keir Starmer saying he was no longer allowed to say that she crashed the economy.
I think
he has to cease and desist because this was unfair and maybe contributed to her losing her seat.
The point about that I didn't understand was that you can say anything in the floor of the House.
Yes.
As long as you don't swear...
You aren't writing us letters saying that we're to cease and desist.
Exactly. You can say anything and that will be reported. So there's no court in the land that's going to prevent people from exchanging...
So it didn't really work for Liz Truss sacking you, did it?
I wouldn't say it did.
And what conclusion, what lesson do you draw? What lesson do you draw from that for Keir Starmer?
So look, I looked at the reports, and of course that's the media.
says, "Do not sack Rachel Reeves to Keir Starmer on Good Morning Britain." I think that's our headline.
I think
I said that if he did,
that is.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying, but if he does do it,
Kwasi, you're no longer a member of Parliament.
No.
You can say what you want. It's okay.
But what I am
Between
saying
us,
is,
just in the privacy of this little
what I am
conversation.
saying is that he won't last very long. I mean, it will shorten his shelf life. The minute the Prime Minister gets rid of the Chancellor, the Prime Ministers think, oh, well, everything will be OK, everyone will be happy. But that doesn't happen. The opposite happens. They'll say, why did you appoint her? That was an error of judgment.
He's the First Lord of the Treasury.
Exactly.
They are so implicated in every decision.
Exactly right. And then they'll ask him, so what did you disagree with about what she did? And then he's done. And the second thing is, whoever the new Chancellor is then becomes the most powerful person in the government, because they're effectively unsackable.
I feel Jonathan's bursting.
Well, I felt like that was a therapy session. The reality is, Keir Starmer is not going to, nor has he ever considered sacking Rachel Reeves, and quite rightly so. Rachel Reeves, I think, is a first-class Chancellor. She's doing a tough job because she's inherited a very tough economic situation, a tough fiscal situation. She's getting on with the job. She has had to take some tough, unpopular decisions, but by the definition, if you're taking a tough decision, they're going to be unpopular.
But I was talking to George Osborne about this on our podcast this week, about this very question, and he says, of course, Prime Ministers should never sack Chancellors, they always lose, but Prime Ministers and Chancellors have to be flexible. You know, they have to learn from what's going well and not going so well. And, you know, are there things Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves need to learn from the last 6 or 7 months and do differently in the next 6 or 7 months?
Well, look, I mean, you know, Chancellors and Prime Ministers always look at the different policy levers they've got in front of them. Of course they do. But at the end of the day, she inherited what she believes was frankly, a burning skip when it came to the public finances.
The economy was growing.
She had to stabilise the public finances. She said she was going to be honest with the public, so she's been honest with the public and taken tough decisions. She did say to the public that some of these decisions are going to be unpopular because she felt she had to offer that to be candid with the public.
Every day this week we've talked about the winter fuel allowance. We had Elaine, who finally got her winter fuel allowance back after coming on this programme. I think it's universally kind of said in politics, you know, that maybe it was a mistake, and yet it doesn't seem to be being kind of talked about and rectified.
But the issue with the winter fuel allowance is that, do any of your viewers think that Richard Branson should get the winter fuel allowance or should have had the winter fuel?
But Elaine was on £12,000 a year.
But the thing is, like, the computer system that delivers it is not able to means test it in that way. That's the problem.
No, but you give the money and then you claw it back. That's what you can do in terms of looking at the top. I mean, there are ways you can do that.
Tax pensioners more?
No, the people at the upper end who can afford.
You can withdraw the winter allowance through the tax system for top-rate taxpayers while leaving it there for middle and low-income pensioners.
And that's been looked at.
If you want to.
That's been looked at.
Well, it's more tax, though, then, isn't it? You're dragging more pensioners into tax. You're asking more pensioners to do tax returns and so on. That's...
Yeah, but it's a choice, isn't it?
And
yes, it is a choice.
At the moment, we're taking the winter allowance away from pensioners on £12,000, £13,000, £14,000 a year. And you're saying, yeah, but I wouldn't want to do the alternative, which is taking it away from people on £100,000 a year because I don't want to make them pay more tax. But of those two, I think I would rather take it away from the richest pensioners and keep it for the lower-income pensioners.
No.
Would be my advice.
No, I'm happy for rich to do. I mean, I stood on the manifesto that you developed.
No, but the reason
that was
why
the policy. I'm in favour of that.
It's because they get more money. You know this. You know, if you just tax the people at the top, you'll get a certain quantum of money, but you get much more money by taking it off everyone. Do
you think, though, if they just stick with the winter fuel allowance policy all this year, people are going to forget about it, or is it a running sore?
Oh, no, I think that people are going to continue to campaign on the winter fuel allowance.
And if you were advising Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer how to deal with it...
Well, the problem is Rachel Reeves is got a very, very difficult set of spending decisions coming up, and she's going to have to make choices. Is it the National Health Service she puts more money into? Is it, schools? Is it policing? You know, we're going to have a spending review in Westminster, I think in the summer, where they outline their spending plans for the next 3 or 4 years. And right across public services, there are legitimate demands for more money.
Sure.
And they're going to have to make choices.
And before that, we've got the sort of mini-budget thing, haven't we? Before that, with Keir Starmer still refusing to rule out tax rises, which people are going to be thinking, oh, my gosh, before we even get to that, could we face more?
The problem that we're facing, which has been around for at least 15 years is growth. And the only way that you can pay fully for the services you want to see is by growing the economy. And what will
How's
happen,
that looking in your view?
and it's looking shaky. I mean, we'll know more, obviously, by the end of the year. But in a couple of months, or I think next month, the OBR will have their forecast. The danger for the Chancellor is if they revise the growth forecast down, that'll mean there'll be a funding gap. That'll mean she'll either have to borrow more money or cut spending or raise taxes. And each of those three alternatives is difficult. And markets and people will react to that. And so what she couldn't do, and she was asked, or Keir Starmer was asked yesterday, will you rule out tax rises? And of course, no responsible minister can say that because you don't know what the figures are. You don't know what the funding need will be. And so it's only when you know that you can decide which of those three choices you choose. And that's why it's always a favourite trick of opposition to say, will you rule out tax rises? Will you do this?
Because it relies upon a Prime Minister who listens to a sensible Chancellor.
Well, but you don't know what the figures are.
No.
And also...
But you need a Prime Minister to listen to sensible Chancellor rather than just think, I'll sack them and that'll solve the problem.
Well, we can talk about that another day. But the issue that you've got is that choice. Do you cut spending or do you raise taxes?
Yeah.
And each of those choices is very difficult. Because the amount you can borrow is limited. You've got an envelope, you've got your fiscal rules.
But politically, though, I mean, you make the point that opposition's always put this to governments. Legitimately, governments can ask the opposition this as well. And so far, Kemi Badenoch is not outlining any alternative policy.
But it never works in PMQs when the Prime Minister starts asking questions of the leader of the opposition. It's called Prime Minister's questions for a reason.
Yeah, but look, if Kemi Badenoch is, for example, opposing the VAT on private school fees, is opposing the winter fuel payment changes, is opposing the farmers' tax, is opposing the increase in national insurance for businesses, fine, if she wants to oppose all of that, then she's got to explain what her alternatives would be.
So I'm not trying to condone everything Kemi's done, but I remember when Labour in opposition, in fact, in the election, we didn't have a clue what they were going to do. They were the Ming-Vars strategy, which was, being very, very cautious.
Was very good at advising shadow chancellors not to...
Exactly.
They couldn't be sure.
Look, every party in opposition has form in not being very clear about what they're going to do with their government.
Shall we look to something that, please God, is a joyous thing, this ceasefire, fingers crossed, everybody holding their breath in the Middle East. On Sunday, hopefully coming into force, not completely signed as yet, but it's looking good so far after 15 months of hell. I mean, everybody must be praying this is it. Although, disturbingly, the violence is still going on, even in the last final days and hours. It's absolutely up to the crunch, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think your description there, 15 months of hell, is the right way to describe this. It's been devastating for the hostages and their loved ones, devastating for the loss of innocent Palestinian lives in Gaza. Look, I've wanted to see a ceasefire for 15 months, effectively.
Yeah.
And even when my own party wasn't as forthright on that, behind the scenes, I was pushing my party to come out stronger in favour.
And you lost your seat in part because Labour was slow to get to that position.
I did, absolutely. That was why I lost my seat, because my constituents in Leicester South wanted to see the Labour Party speak out in more forthright terms for a ceasefire, and it was something I agreed with, actually, and was making that point.
Now, has that not... I mean, you might have agreed with it, and those people definitely wanted it, but has not doing that facilitated the point to which we've come to this now? Do you know what I mean? Would it come out and condemning, would that have caused problems that slowed it down?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there was a ceasefire deal. It's a very, very fragile deal, right?
Yeah.
And we've got to see the hostages released, and then we've got to see a plan for the reconstruction of Gaza. There's still questions about who funds that. There's questions about whether we can actually move towards a peaceful, long-term settlement. The international community have obviously worked with Israel and the Hamas to bring this about.
Qatar and Egypt seem to have been crucial.
The big event that's going to happen in the next few days is the inauguration of Donald Trump.
Quite. And he's already claiming...
He's claiming the victory. He's saying that it was all about him. President Biden is saying that it was his plan. My understanding is that Trump's people have been involved.
Oh, yeah.
And I
think they've worked together.
They've worked together, which is good. But I'm very interested to know what the deal is with Netanyahu, because clearly it seems to me that there must have been some conversation between Trump's people.
And he's still not come out and absolutely stamped it, has he? Presumably, because internally there is...
Well, he's got a coalition, and there'll be people on the extreme end of that coalition that will be looking to essentially block the deal.
It's also very dangerous for him. I mean, he was under a huge amount of criticism, certainly in the first half of last year, for why this happened in the first place.
That's right.
And but while Israel's at war, you know, people
being
come
very
together
cynical.
and support the Prime Minister in time of war. The moment there is a peace, and also the moment the journalists, aid workers will go into to Gaza and see what's happened, there'll also be a reckoning as to what happened. Why did this happen in the first place? For Netanyahu, it's a moment of danger. It's dangerous.
Absolutely, and this isn't a done deal, as it were. We have a cessation of fighting on Sunday. Then we have
could be destabilised at any point.
Hostages are released over a number of days and weeks.
And
so this could all
Palestinian prisoners as well.
Yeah, so the whole thing could still collapse. It's still very, very shaky. But my God, let's hope it succeeds.
Let's bang the win. I mean, just a final point. Netanyahu is the great survivor of global politics. I mean, I remember when he first became Prime Minister, I think I was at university. I mean, it was a very long time ago. And he's kept resuscitating himself. He's had comebacks. He's kept himself in office. And you're right. I think he will try and make sure, I'm afraid, that his political career is extended.
But we pray for the hostages to be released and for that to happen. But of course, many hostages have not survived.
That's right.
Many have lost their lives, and that is something which will be, a reckoning for
and that will be revealed.
And a wound.
All of that will be revealed probably in the coming weeks. And there's a lot still we don't know about the deal and the condition of the hostages.
That's right. That's right. Do you think we should just say a word about the loss of our...
Yes, I absolutely do. Linda Nolan, I'm sure she and the Nolan sisters have figured in both of your lives in many ways. Of course, she came on our show here on Good Morning Britain many times, and we all knew and saw her separately, and is always so inspirational. And yesterday it was announced that she'd passed away.
Yeah.
Actually, pneumonia, I think, being contributory to the final stages, but of course had been dealing and living with cancer for a long time. The last time she was on the programme, she was her usual self, absolutely full of positivity.
I do try and not surround our lives with cancer. You know, it seems like we do, but it's surrounding us for sure. But we're very philosophical about things, you know.
Yeah. There's a sign next to you which sums you up, I think. Enjoy every moment, and I know you do. And in fact, when you first had the not-so-good scans that said they'd grown the tumour in your brain, you went out and decided, right, I'm going to eat. I'm going to have a good old meal, and I'm going to eat. And why not, yeah?
Absolutely. And now he's put me on steroids. I'll probably eat my own weight in chocolate. And that's enough.
Well... I mean, full of spirit and joy of life, and always just grateful for every day, which is a lesson to us all. And as we were saying earlier, what a week it's been for those that are prepared to speak out about their troubles, because Princess of Wales, Catherine, having the brilliant news that she's in remission, and her speaking so openly has helped all those that life continues while you're living with cancer.
She has, and it's been so unusual to see a member of the royal family, Princess Catherine, talking about her cancer and her struggle and then the relief of remission. But of course, that's what Linda has been doing for the last 7 years, and it's good to see the royals doing that too. But actually, people like Linda talking about her 20-year struggle with cancer, it has a big impact upon people, family members.
And it's a big change, in the last few decades, because there was a time when we didn't talk about grave illnesses like that. And I think what Princess Catherine and also Linda have shown is, the bravery and also an openness about talking about, life-threatening, appalling conditions.
Yeah.
But I mean, that poor family has been so touched with tragedy and cancer, hasn't it? The Nolan sisters, if you think about it, it is amazing that when you watch them, as I know Ed was glued to, when they were the Nolan sisters, full of beans, full of joy, it's a lesson that you just don't know what's around the corner.
I think they were originally on Opportunity Knocks, weren't they?
Yeah, I think
That's
I didn't know that.
I think did they eventually break through on Opportunity Knocks? I think they were.
Don't know. I'm a bit younger than you, Ed. I don't know. I can't remember.
You're younger than me.
I knew you were going to pull
As a
that card.
child, we grew up. The Nolans were so
were huge, yeah.
glamorous
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
exciting and so beautiful.
I mean-
and they've gone on to have amazing careers individually
Sure.
after the
In all
act.
sorts
But Linda
of different ways.
when was Linda first diagnosed? 20 years ago?
20 years
I mean, so she's been living under the shadow of cancer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think
For
it's been in
decades.
remission and clear and come back
That's
from
right.
different places. And it kind of brings us full circle, doesn't it? Because she always paid huge tribute to the nursing care she had, absolutely, all the way through it, and how vital it was.
Absolutely, and the way in which she has advocated on behalf of people living with cancer, for ensuring people have the right care and support. And I just want to mention that there was actually some welcome news in terms of, for those who are interested in cancer care, that earlier this week the government confirmed that screening for bowel cancer, people from 50 are going to be sent
down,
tests.
to 50.
And when I was the Shadow Health Secretary, I remember speaking out on that particular issue, and I would encourage your viewers watching, if they are sent tests in the post, please do it, because a lot of people get sent tests and they stick them in a drawer.
You're too young.
And they don't.
I've done it.
Yeah.
It's actually very, very easy and straightforward.
Yeah.
The moment you read the thing, you think, God, this is a bit unusual, but it's really easy and so worth doing.
It's very good,
absolutely.
and we send all our love, obviously, to Linda's family and all her friends as well.
And our thanks for what they've done.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, both of you.